Those of us who see Donald Trump as a threat to democracy agree that he must be defeated in November. From trying to overturn the last election he lost to promising to use the force of law to exact revenge on his enemies if he returns to power, to the 900-plus page playbook known as Project 2025, which lays out a detailed plan for seizing and consolidating power, the danger is clear and present. But we seem to have lost sight of all of this in the last 9 days for some valid reasons. Since President Joe Biden's performance in the first presidential debate, there's been much debate among the punditry about his competency to run, along with justified anger toward the team that surrounds him. But without dismissing the legitimacy of those concerns, this election remains about one thing and one thing only: the threat of losing our democracy. And that is where our efforts at convincing one another need to be spent. You can list all of Biden's flaws, and you'd still be left with the same conclusion. Only one of the two main presidential candidates poses an existential threat to democracy. No doubt Biden's debate performance was a collective shock to the system, in part a consequence of mounting frustrations in recent years that reached a climax that evening. Since witnessing a mob of extremists overtake the nation's capital, we've been battered by a series of events that have shaken this nation's foundations to its core. From the battle to rewrite American history in our schools, to book bans and organized efforts led by extremist judges, attorneys general, and Christian nationalists to forces to roll back civil rights. Before we can fully process one crisis, we're hit with another. For so long, many of us naively believed that our democracy is infallible. These threats can never flourish here. But the actions of extremists in recent years, with the help from the Supreme Court, have shattered that illusion, leading us to this moment. The current rage, the confusion, the bickering are all different and valid manifestations of our collective anguish. We grieve that our 248-year-old democracy has reached this precarious point, teetering on the edge of uncertainty. But now more than ever, it's crucial that we hold our ground. It's crucial that we maintain perspective. Whatever happens with Biden, whether he steps aside or stays the course, the Democratic nominee, any Democratic nominee, will be a better option than the alternative, which is the downfall of American democracy. None of this dismisses the legitimacy of concerns about Biden. None of this absolves the media and the Democratic establishment of their failures. Understanding how we reach this point demands a reckoning that must occur. But American politics right now is a big building on fire, and discussing whether the building had enough sprinklers in it is not the discussion for right now. There will be ample opportunity for reflection if democracy prevails. But if extremists seize control in November, that will be the least of our concerns. This week, we celebrated 248 years of independence from the oppressive shackles of a tyrannical king. Shortly before the 50th anniversary of American independence, in 1826, Thomas Jefferson would write his last public letter. His words resonate even more strongly today. He referred to himself as one of the surviving signers of a declaration pregnant with our own and the fate of the world. He continued, "It's good to know that, quote, our fellow citizens, after half a century of experience and prosperity, continue to approve the choice we made. Let the annual return of this day forever refresh our recollections of these rights and an undiminished devotion to them," end quote. There's a paradox worth mentioning here when you talk about Jefferson. Despite working to establish a new nation founded on the principles of freedom and liberty, Thomas Jefferson was a slave owner. And the nation's founding document, which he authored, did not move to abolish slavery. Since Jefferson penned those words, those rights have been extended to black people and to other minorities and to women, with each generation building upon the last. Since declaring independence, our great American experiment has been tested over and over again. We have sacrificed many lives to safeguard liberal values both at home and abroad. During World War II, the world was divided into two camps, democratic versus fascist forces. Where America stood was clear, and it played a crucial role in liberating Western Europe from totalitarianism. Our contribution solidified our position as a global superpower. Consider how differently that war may have played out if we had a demagogue steering America off the cliff, much like we might have after November's election. Today, Our great American experiment is at risk of collapse. Rid yourself of the notion that this is simply a race between two parties. This is a fight to preserve our hard-fought freedoms. We have two candidates. One stands for democracy, and one doesn't. That's the beginning and the end of the realization that voters need to have. Biden's condition, whether it's tiredness or something else, is certainly not irrelevant, but it's almost irrelevant. 74 million people voted for Donald Trump in the last election. 81 million people voted for Joe Biden. The failure is that after 4 years of Donald Trump, more eligible voters didn't vote than voted for either candidate. Even after 4 years of Donald Trump's disastrous policies and in the middle of the COVID crisis that Donald Trump made much worse than it needed to be. This moment, and I'm not sure who should be at the top of the ballot, but this moment transcends Joe Biden or any of our feelings about him. Our effort now is nothing less than the preservation of democracy. More than 2 centuries after the Founding Fathers rejected tyranny, we find ourselves summoned to a similar call to defend and uphold the principles of democracy. Our job as citizens is to choose democracy, whomever is carrying that flag into the next